Hello and welcome to the Comic Conspiracy Podcast, episode 486 for the week of February 2nd, Tuesday. My name is Ryan Higgins. Who's here with me this week?
Brock Sager.
Kevin.
Toby.
Charlie.
Well, Toby introduced himself with his normal name, so you know something weird is going on here. We have a very...
You don't have to be proper today. We have something
we do.
done.
We have a very special guest with us. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Joshua Williamson.
It's Joshua Williamson. Back again. Writer of The Flash.
We didn't scare him away the first time.
Yeah, Josh, writer of The Flash, Justice League, Nailbiter, Birthright, bunch of other titles. And specifically, the reason he's here today is to talk about Infinite Frontier number 0. So this episode is going to be mostly that. Before we get to Infinite Frontier, though, Josh, you were on... It was a little bit before the pandemic hit. Just as we've liked to ask all our guests that have been on, generally speaking, how are things?
Things are good. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I'm totally good here. My family is safe and healthy, and we've been all really good. We actually had a baby at the end of last year, and so we were already in this. It's my second kid, and we were already in that zone of, like, you never go anywhere. You wash your hands all the time. You're always, like, everybody's on top of trying to stay healthy because you don't want to get the baby sick. I get sick at, like, the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
And so we were already in that zone. And I was really sick at the end of last year going into January. I had a pneumonia. And I was, like, while we had the baby, like, when the baby was born, I was in the hospital. And I couldn't, like, I had to be super on top of everything. I was already wearing a mask in the hospital because of that in December. So I was already in that zone. So by the time we went into the pandemic, for me, I was like, I've already been here for like 3 months. Of like never leaving my house, washing my hands all the time, not really engaging when people are going out anyway.
No.
So for us, it was like a weird thing. And sometimes I feel like I was built to never leave my house, I feel like sometimes. So all of these things, I was like, oh, this is my time, I guess. I've never gotten cabin fever in my life. Like, I don't even know what that even is like. Now I kind of do. Now I kind of understand. But I was already kind of built in, so we've been good. Everything here is cool. We'll just keep my head down, working, and my wife and the kids are great. So thank you for asking.
Good. Yeah, of course. Well, that's the whole thing about other comic people I've talked to. They're like, yeah, I never leave my house anyway. We're writers or artists. The only time we ever leave is for conventions. So,
well, you kind of miss conventions now. I never thought I would miss conventions. I kind of miss conventions now, which is like, yeah. I got to go to C2E2 before this whole thing started, and I'm glad I got to go to that one last
right at the
convention
end
before we had to do all this stuff.
Yeah, I would. We've talked pretty regularly about this. I'm pretty confident we won't have a New York Comic Con or San Diego. Maybe some smaller cons this year. But I think next year is going to be crazy. Everyone's going to have extreme, really missing conventions. So they should be good, assuming everything kind of.
Comic Con's going to last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's going to be wild. I think when finally everything starts opening up again. I mean, if you told me this. At the beginning of this, I thought we'd at least get to Emerald City this year. Like, I thought Emerald City Comic Con this year would be the con that would be the first, con in a long time, but that's clearly not happening. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when we finally start doing cons again, and how.
Well, I think too, like, people don't realize how long it takes to plan a convention. I mean, planning Comic Con's a whole year, right, to plan the next one, or probably longer. So
yeah, I used to live when I lived in San Diego. I lived near the offices for San Diego Comic Con. And whenever I had to fill paperwork out or do anything for that convention, when I was doing like small press table and stuff, I would always go drop my paperwork off in the office. And it was interesting to actually walk in. That's what was crazy to see how small an office it is, considering how big San Diego Comic Con is. But and actually, that was long before I think like the Twilight explosion of San Diego Comic Con, and how Comic Con got crazier and crazier because of Hall H.
Right.
But this is before all that. But going in there, you can just tell that was. For 2 weeks of the year, they would spend a whole year figuring out those 2 weeks. It was crazy.
Just so many moving parts.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of moving parts, what a great segue to Infinite Frontier number 0. So we actually did a podcast all about Metal 7 and sort of our thoughts, theories, kind of where DC is going with this. A lot of our regular listeners know a lot of us are big DC fans on here, myself especially. There had been some concern that maybe some elements of DC were going to be lost going into Infinite Frontier and post-Metal, that continuity didn't matter. You see all these clickbait news articles over the course of the last 6 to 8 months about DC. It's we've kind of gone on about this forever, it feels like. I want to pose a question to you, and maybe because I know there is still some confusion around kind of the state of DC's continuity, but especially like kind of what's happening now going forward post Metal and with Infinite Frontier. But I've had I've mentioned this on this podcast, so our regular listeners are gonna remember me saying this a few times. I've kind of had my take on it has been very similar to what Marvel does, and again, maybe you can correct me or tell me if you think I'm kind of on the money here, because it feels like to me DC through the years has kind of had these like more hard breaks with obviously Crisis and the Silver Age, Golden Age, and Infinite Crisis and New 52 and now Rebirth. And while they pick and choose bits of continuity they want to carry through, they do have these more kind of hard dividing lines. Marvel's continuity has always been a lot more fluid. You have these sort of set times, Captain America being frozen in World War II, but really everything else is a generic 10 to 15 years ago. Clearly Peter Parker was not a teenager in the 60s. The Fantastic Four at this point would be part of SpaceX, not the space race, but it kind of just adjusts forward as time goes. And if they want to talk about Hawkeye's goofy ass costumes from like the mid 60s, they can. And if they don't ever want to talk about it, they kind of don't have to. The harder lines that I think DC has drawn don't exist in Marvel. And I kind of want to get your take as really one of the main architects of DC continuity going forward. Am I anywhere on the money there? Does that come close?
About it. Like, I'll use my Flash run as the example, right? I mean, I was kind of cheating at times on Flash, where to me, when you go back and look at like when Rebirth started, right? Like, there was an ad that came out at the beginning of Rebirth that was like, it was never a reboot, right? Like, it never was. It's not an alternate reality. I'm not sure if you remember that. When I was working on Flash, as far as I was concerned, everything happened. Like, once Wally came back, the door was open. Like, and I would have this conversation with editorial and different writers. But the moment Wally came back and he said, this is a thing that happened. Manhattan changed our reality. And we know that Crisis happened. We know the Flashpoint happened. And Manhattan came and did this thing. From that point forward, I was like, it all happened. So if I want to reference something from a Flash issue from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20, 30, whatever, I'm going to reference it. I'm going to talk about that. And the idea that they are aware that someone messed with their timeline. They're aware of it. They know that the timeline has been messed with multiple times. That's why things are kind of weird at times, right? They know that's why they're younger when they should be older. And that was what Wonder Woman, when you look at Death Metal at the ending, she talks about how one of the things that Perpetua was doing was that she kept putting a knot in their timeline. And then they were going to stretch it out. They were going to unknot that timeline. So you're going to see in Infinite Frontier a little bit of, I don't want to say that we're cherry picking the past, but I guess we are, right? Like, as far as I'm concerned, whenever I'm writing these books, it all happened, especially up to Crisis. Like, when you get to Crisis, because all the worlds became one, and then that becomes kind of its own continuity, that's one thing. But I feel like if you're a writer on these books, and you do want to reference something from, let's say you're writing Superman, and you want to reference Death of Superman, or you want to reference something from the 80s or 70s or 60s, you should do that. Whatever leads you to tell the best story you can with that character, that's what you should do. Now, with that concern about continuity and these things being connected, man, I am a continuity junkie. There's no way I'm not going to go. Like, there's no way I'm just going to let these stuff not be connected. And that's one of the things about Infinite Frontier Zero is you're going to see these things are still connected. And I have a lot of conversations with other writers, with other characters I'm working on, and making sure that it is still one whole universe moving forward.
All right.
Like, as far as I'm concerned, everything from Future State back, it happened. And now we're moving forward. So if you're a writer and you want to reference something going back, you just do that. And there isn't as much of a hard line of like, this happened in this order. And I think part of that is because it didn't help things. Like when they tried doing that with New 52, man, remember like looking at the Robins and they were like,
very confusing.
Batman has been Batman for 5 years. Bullshit. Like, you're not going to tell me that Dick, Jason, Tim, Damian, Steph, like, they weren't all Robin in those 5 years. That just is not happening, right? So now it's like, let's just say, like, these characters recognize that somebody messed with time and that's why they're younger. Some of them remember it, some of them don't. And one of the things we're going to be exploring this next year in some of the book is that impact, the impact of having reality messed with and what that can do to people and what that does to their heads about some of this stuff. In Infinite Frontier Zero, there is a scene between two characters and they talk about being told by Mr. Terrific that they're going to gradually remember some of their past. They're going to start remembering things they did not remember before. And the fact that all of them are, it's kind of like how it was at the beginning of Rebirth in a way, where it's like gradually people started remembering like, oh, I had this other life and all these other things. We're just ramping that up. I feel like it's a little bit more like the Marvel way, I guess. But I guess to me, it's still like it's all one continuity. It's all one story. It's just it's been messed with. Like there's a narrative. What's funny about this is for every time that's happened, there's been a narrative reason for it, right? So it's like the Anti-Monitor did this. 0 Hour happened, Flashpoint happened, Manhattan did this, and now you have Death Metal. There's been a narrative reason for these like weird things that have happened to our timeline as characters, and so now they remember it. They know these things have happened to them, but that allows us to just kind of take all these stories and all our favorite things and just run with it. I would encourage other writers to just find the stuff that they love and keep going. Because I do with Flash. I would have these conversations with the editors sometime, and they'd be like, well, that didn't happen. Oh, my God. That happened to Batman and Superman, too. There were times where I would be like, oh, I want to do this. And they'd be, I have this plan, and I'm going to reference this thing. And then I'd get a phone call from somebody, and they would be like, oh, technically, that hasn't happened. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And they're like, well, technically, you're referencing pre-Flashpoint continuity. And I was like, Rebirth, man. It happened.
Yeah.
Like, I'm moving forward with that. It gets weird sometimes because certain characters have different histories and stuff, and I don't want to be rude and say I ignore certain things, but I do. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Does that help you with it? With your
yeah. Well, and that's I think that's a big part of what we've been talking about is that continuity matters to the story as much as the writer wants it to. A generic Superman story.
The reader has to engage with it too, and it's important to them. And I think you have to be able to find a way of massaging it. Like Jeff was always really great at this.
Right.
Jeff was always really great at taking all of the pieces and moving forward with it and having fun with it and making it. And that's part of what Death Metal was about. Was it all matters? It all happened. It all counted. And now we're moving forward with it. Like, let's have a good time. That's the ending to Death Metal. Is all that stuff counted? It all happened. Now let's have a good time. Let's move on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's not to say selfish, not quite the right word, but losing older continuity, you lose these stories. If Killing Joke didn't happen, then it doesn't make a lot of sense for Killing Joke stuff to be in New 52. And if they reference it, okay, well, I guess it did happen, but how does this link up with any of the events that have happened? Elements like that. If it matters to the story at hand, you should be able to access it. And I feel like the harder lines that DC have taken, I get the point of Crisis and what they've tried to do, but I feel like it makes it more confusing, not less.
Yes. Oh, for sure. For sure. It definitely, at the time, I think made it more confusing. But now, whenever these things come up, it becomes a better conversation about what is better for the story I'm trying to tell today versus here's a hard line. Like, for example, I'm going to give you a really weird example, maybe. So if you notice, past New 52, Jim Gordon had red hair. He didn't have gray hair anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a hard line. And I remember when we started doing Batman and Superman, to me, Jim Gordon is always going to have gray hair. Or he should have gray hair now. And in the beginning of Batman and Superman, he had the gray hair. And then I got an email one day that was like, oh, we messed up. He should have been having red hair this whole time. We're going to make a line to explain why he has gray hair instead of red hair. And it was just, it was things like that you're like, I guess, why am I explaining this? Like, he has gray hair. It's fine. And now you'll notice. But so that was a year ago, right? That was almost 2 years ago. And now you'll notice in Joker, and the Joker comic that James is doing, he has gray hair. And he's just going to have gray hair from now on. And with that, it was like a conversation did take place, but it was much more about what was best for the story and what was best in that moment than different hard lines. But again, like, I'm a continuity junkie. Like, that's one thing about Infinite Frontier Zero. I have definitely... So with Infinite Frontier Zero, there are 13 chapters in it. And the different chapters are written by different people. So different writers who are writing those characters are writing their chapter. And there were times that I definitely was like the continuity nerd that was like, well, actually, like going through and asking questions and being like, well, in this continuity, this happened. So, they shouldn't be saying this kind of thing. And so I'm always going to be that person. I'm always going to sit there and be like, well, it's funny when we're in these summits in these writers' rooms. I'm definitely the person that is like, well, actually, in 2005, this is what happened. And so is James, too. Like, James is definitely a continuity guy, especially when it comes to Batman or any of the Batman mythology. So I think as long as you have people like that in the room that are going to bring that stuff up, especially now, I think editorial, it's really cool right now. A lot of editorial are people who were reading DC in the 90s and were reading it in the 2000s. And so they're also really knowledgeable about the continuity. And I think they like that we can borrow stuff from the past. Like, this is another silly example. When we were doing No Justice, we were talking about Beast Boy, and I remember we were in a summit, and we're going at all this stuff about the different characters and how they're going on the space adventure, and one of the things we talked about was Beast Boy. And I remember one of the editors in the room, we started talking about Beast Boy and how he had experience in space, and I was like, well, actually, he was on a TV show. He was on like a Star Trek, like soap opera.
Right.
Show. But that was in pre-Flashpoint continuity. But one of the editors in the room was like, yeah, and we started talking about it, and it was like, let's just keep that. Like, who cares? Let's say he was on that show and have fun with it. And I think there's a lot more of that kind of moving forward with it, of like, what is the best way we can tell this story with this character and have fun with it, but still have it be connected. There's a lot more conversations among us about our characters and talking with each other about how to connect what we want to do. The back group now, we have meetings once a month where we all get on Zoom and talk about our characters and our books. I actually need to talk to Bendis about some stuff this week. I talked to him today, but I need to talk to him again next week about a couple things that connect our plans together. I talked to Ram V about things he's doing. I talked to Phil Kenny Johnson about things he's doing. There's a lot more conversation, I think, than there was in the past about making sure we can tell this giant, big story. Because it is hard telling a big story when you're dealing with like 30 books or plus at times. But yeah, we want to make sure it's all this big continuity going forward.
Well, there is a question I want to get from one of the guys on Twitter. We had put out for some questions here, but what you just said, I want to ask one more question before we get to this. One of the rumors that have been going on for a while, again with DC, is that post Infinite Frontier, really, but post Metal, that DC's not going to be connected with their books. They're going to be way looser. They're not going to cross over. They're not going to have a continuity. And I mean, immediately from the solicitations in March, we know that's just not true. But just what you were just saying. Obviously, even now, all the writers are still like, how can our books flow together? How can these stories all work? Because it is still an interconnected world. There is still continuity.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know where that comes from, to be honest. But yeah,
the internet.
It's definitely still connected. I don't know. I will say at times there is a drive, and we can talk about this with other questions that I know are coming that I saw, but it's like, when you look at something as, I'll give you this example, you look at something like Hush, right? I think Hush is a great example of a way to do a book, right? It's in continuity, it's a greatest hits. When you're reading, even if it was coming out, if it wasn't Jim and Jeff Loeb, you would feel like, oh, this is the greatest hits because it has all the villains in it, it has all these big moments in it.
All right.
It did kind of stand alone a little bit, but it didn't contradict anything, and it clearly was in the Bat universe, and it wasn't like a Black Label thing. It wasn't an Elseworld. So you might see instances like that where there might be books that are just like, I'm telling my story on my track, but that doesn't mean it's going to contradict anything and not take place, and then it is going to be reflected later. And I love reflecting stuff. When I was doing Flash, I was... I would go to those summits and I would take notes and be like, oh, cool, this person's doing this, I'm going to reference it. So, like, there was an issue of Flash where he had to go to Argus, and Argus had been destroyed in Event Leviathan. So I was like, oh, I'm going to use that. I'm going to say that when he gets there, it's destroyed, and he has to go to some warehouse to get the information. Like, I think you're going to see stuff like that where there's going to be loose things. We were just talking about this with the Bat Group, where it's like, Tom Taylor is writing Nightwing, I'm writing Robin, there's plans for those characters, plans for Jason Todd and Tim Drake, and, Tom and I were talking about, like, how can we reflect each other and not always do crossovers? Or if it's like, oh man, you're doing that in that month? Okay, that's cool. What if I did something that same month that referenced what you were doing and I can reflect it somehow? There's going to be stuff like that. You might have an instance where somebody is saying, I'm going to do this like 6-issue story in my book, but that's no different than it's always been.
Right.
Like, there were times I would do Flash, I would do year 1 for 6 issues and I was on my own little world, or I would do Flash War, anything. There were times you do 6 issues and you're just like, I'm telling my own little story here. I don't have to always connect all the time. And I think that's okay. And there's still going to be stuff like that. But let me tell you, like, looking at everything that's coming and all the stuff that people are doing, it's all super connected, but not in a way you have to read it. Like, there's definitely, especially in the groups, in the different groups, I think the Bat Group, the Superman group, you look at Justice League, Bendis has been really trying to find ways of and reflecting what other people are doing. Big time. There's stuff that's going to happen in Justice League that remember when Grant did JLA?
Of course, one of my favorites.
Right? We could talk about that all night. But okay, so JLA would have Blue Suit Superman in it. You would have Hippolyta join the team. You would have all these, Connor Hawk join the team, and he would, Grant and JLA would do its best to kind of reflect what's going on. And I know that's something that Bendis is trying to do as well. Like, he's trying to do that. So, I think people will see as we go deeper into the year that these things are connected as one universe. Yeah.
Well, the example I've used in the past, too, is in a similar fashion. Like, every time Galactus shows up in the Fantastic Four, every Marvel book doesn't reference it for months. That's just not how it works.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I don't think you're going to see... It's not going to be a thing where every month everything is connected all the time. And it's not going to be that way anyway.
But it's not like these books are completely disconnected with no threads. No, it's like, it's still the DC universe. Like, I don't get these rumors. It's a weird... Yeah,
well,
take. I don't know.
I don't know where this stuff comes from. I just know this stuff is connected and we do talk to each other. I mean, let me tell you, every time all the books I'm working on, if there is a I don't want to say there's a database. That's the wrong word. Mm-hmm. I know there are spreadsheets. There are character spreadsheets to make sure we all know where the characters are. There's a book that I'm writing that's coming out in the fall, and I had to, with like every little character in it, there's like a supporting character I wanted, and I went to the editors and I was like, hey, can I use this character? And they checked, they made sure nobody else was using him, then I could have him. So there's definitely people being, how do I put this, they're on top of it. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be this crazy thing where it's just all over the place. But others, there's been like, think about when New 52 started, there was like 5 Batman books.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone was telling their own Batman story, and it was fine, and we all knew it was in the same universe. We all knew it was taking place at not the exact same time, but we all knew it was the same universe.
I think Kevin's got a question, and then we'll start hitting up some of these Twitter questions here.
I just wanted to circle back briefly to Crisis on Infinite Earths, which you guys were talking about. And Josh, as you mentioned, those of us who were buying DC at that in the aftermath, there were certainly some choppy waters back then. And I'm wondering, people will have their own feelings on Crisis, Infinite Crisis, 0 Hour, et cetera, et cetera. Without asking you to point fingers at any particular event, I'm wondering, when you guys are sitting down to kind of map this one out, are there certain pitfalls you all are kind of aware of, and there's kind of a thinking of, we've got to just be sure to avoid X?
Like when we were building Infinite Frontier, or
or Infinite Frontier in the aftermath.
No, I have my personal opinion on certain events I like more than others. I think, I don't think there's anything where like let's avoid. And maybe I'm too optimistic about DC stuff. Maybe I like certain eras more than other people. I know it's funny. Like I really liked 1 Year Later. I know some people didn't like 1 Year Later, but I liked it. I thought it was cool. I bought all those books. It was at the end of me working at a store. I was a manager of a store. It was one of the last things I ordered before I stopped working there, and I really liked it. And I don't know. I don't think there's anything that I looked at and was like, let's not do it like that. I think we just really wanted to make sure all the books were good and just have fun with it. I know that sounds really silly because everyone's goals are always to have, make sure the books are good. But I don't think there's anything in particular. I know there's certain events that I'm not as much of a fan of as other people. Like there are some events that DC's done. It's funny, like Scott, James, and I have different opinions on this. I'm much more of an Infinite Crisis person. Like my two favorites are probably Crisis on Infinite Earths and Infinite Crisis, which you can tell they're connected anyway. Like they're already related to each other. But yeah, I can't think there was anyone in particular that we were like, oh, let's not do it like that. I'd have to think about that for a while. There was no cautionary tales in building this one out or talking with other creators or editorial. I think also because it's such a different DC now, I don't think there was anything in particular that kept me of like, don't do it like that one.
I think if it works, it'll work. All right. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. That's kind of.
This is one thing I will tell you is that, when Rebirth ended, there were a lot of mysteries in Rebirth. And, are you still recording? Okay, cool. On my end, it
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this still going?
It's on you guys. There it goes. It's fine. Okay. So
yeah, we're still good.
When Rebirth happened, there were a lot of mysteries in Rebirth, and it took a little bit of time to get to some of those mysteries, With Infinite Frontier, all of the mysteries that are set up at Infinite Frontier, we get to pretty quickly. So it's like the stuff that happens in the back group, the mysteries that are laid out in the back stories in Infinite Frontier, they start dealing with that immediately in March. Some of the other mysteries we kind of lay out, usually by the summer, most of them are getting rolling. So I think that's one of the differences is that we wanted to get quicker to some of the stuff that we were putting on the table. We didn't want to draw some stuff out. There's a couple things, but we wanted to get the ball rolling on a couple of mysteries.
It makes sense. So I got a question here from David on Twitter, and this kind of goes back to the whole. We get a number of questions sort of similar to this, so I may kind of jump around here a little bit, but yeah, it says, how does the whole "it all matters" of Infinite Frontier work? Some parts of history contradict each other. Does hypertime play a role again, or is it something else? And will we learn about that in Infinite Frontier 0? Because hypertime was brought up in Metal 7, so
yeah, well, we brought hypertime up in the original Metal as well. In the original Metal, Cyborg and the rest of them, they kind of rediscovered hypertime back then. We just didn't really use it a lot. I would say hypertime is definitely back in play. One thing about Infinite Frontier is that the characters that are in it, particularly a few of them, I'll just say like Flash and President Superman, and the Totality group that you saw at the end of Death Metal 7, they are researching what has happened. And they're looking into hypertime, and they're looking into the weirdness of this new multiverse and all of this unusual activity with their timeline. And so you're going to get those answers, but you're going to learn it at the same time the characters do, because they're looking into it too. They don't have a blueprint in front of them telling them exactly what happened and why some of these contradictions happen. You'll start seeing it over the course of stuff that comes out after, without getting too much into spoilers. Stuff that comes out after the 0, you're going to start seeing those things being answered of what is actually going on with the timeline and the continuity. But yeah, the things that contradict each other, I think that's going to rely on the writer and the team and editorial to figure out which ones they want to pick. I always like when they try to figure out a way of mashing it together or figure out a way of answering it, you know? So it'll just depend on the book.
Well, I've always said Jeff Johns is one of those writers where he could take all this really bad stuff and make it all make sense and not throw it away. And it's that's very tricky.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I know Toby's going to like this question. This is from Jake. He says, how soon could we see more elements from Wildstorm interact with the DC universe? And I know we have Grifter back and Authority, Midnighter.
Yeah, I would.
A couple characters already.
Definitely read. My answer is yes. You should definitely read Batman Urban Legend that has a Grifter story in that. Like, there's a reason Grifter's in that story. And I feel like it would be silly to say, like, Grifter's not doing Wildstormy stuff. Like, there are things coming with that, so I would definitely read that. And then, read the Midnighter backups. I know that there are people at DC, obviously, who love Wildstorm, and not just Jim Lee. But I know other writers who love Wildstorm. I love Wildstorm, too. I have all kinds of thoughts on Wildstorm stuff. I tried to work at Wildstorm multiple times when I was younger, when I was first breaking in. One of my first pitches I ever sent was for a Stormwatch pitch. It was to John Layman when John Layman was still the Wildstorm editor. And so that's like almost 20 years ago. And I sent him a Stormwatch pitch that was 30 pages long. And I remember he wrote me back, and all he wrote me back was, "Fuck you, I'm not reading that." Because it was 30 pages. That was my lesson when I learned that pitches really should be, you break them up. It's like one is like your cover letter of like everything they kind of need to know one page. And then you can get longer after that, which is funny because like with pitching, I always do really short pitches, like 1-2 pages. If I get deeper into something, if I know I'm already approved, I'll get longer. That's how I'm always like. Whereas in James writes much longer pitches. His are always like 10 pages long. But it's that balance. But yeah, there's definitely some stuff coming. I would read the Batman Urban Legends book that has Grifter in it.
We got a couple questions here from a Maverick Comic 1 on Twitter, and we'll get to this first question specifically for you. Will Wallace and Avery, Wallace West, of course, the other Kid Flash, and Avery have a bigger part of Infinite Frontier? And apart from Infinite Frontier, any chance they're still planning any Flash family stories?
Barry and Wally are Infinite Frontier 0. They have a big scene. They have an important scene. I wrote that scene. It was something really important to me to write. I wanted to do it. And so Barry and Wally have a scene in that. I know there are plans for Wallace next year. He's in the Teen Titans book. And Avery... There's a project I learned about a few weeks ago, and I asked some questions about Avery, and it sounds like it's a cool thing that's happening. I can't get too deep into that one because it's not something I'm working on particularly, but I know there are plans for those characters, and some of it's really cool.
Well, they also ask Teen Titans Academy, do you know how many cast members will be on that? And that's one of those books that I'm really excited for because I feel like
cast. You look at those covers, there's a lot of characters in it, but it's a lot of characters in there. That's a book that's been mentioned or talked about, I think, for like a few years. It's something that is in development. And so now with this, it's interesting because it has the Titans, it has characters who've been Teen Titans, and then they have a bunch of new characters that are being added to it. So it's a pretty big cast, but I think it's going to be one of it'll be a special book. And it's being drawn by Rafa Sandoval, who is one of my artists on Flash, and I love him. Everything I've seen of it looks so cool. I get to look at a lot. That's one thing that's been really fun is I get to look at a lot of these books as they're being developed. And some of the stuff, I don't even know when some of the stuff's coming out. There's books that haven't been announced yet that I see art for, and I'm like, that looks amazing. But I get to have access to some of this stuff a little early. And what were you going to say, Ryan? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I was going to say we have, especially on this podcast, a number of OG plus New Teen Titans fans, as well as like the Jeff Johns kind of redo era. Titans have been I think about 6 Titans books and I'd be super happy. But I understand maybe, one or two at most kind of makes the most sense. And the idea of having the older Titans be the kind of the teachers to the younger kids feels like such a no-brainer. And I'm surprised it actually kind of took this long to get this book off the ground.
I'm excited that Nightwing is in it because remember the Jeff Johns stuff when it was Cyborg and Starfire and they were running that Jeff Johns group. Like Nightwing wasn't really in it because he was running Outsiders at the time. But I'm glad that Nightwing is a big part of that book. He does have a pretty big role. It's really funny, right? So with Teen Titans Academy, there is a major plot point. I think it's introduced pretty early that was part of the original pitch to me. Like when they pitched to me about what they were doing with the book that I like super loved. And I was like, oh my God, how come no one has thought about that? Like that is such a cool thing to do with that book. And it hasn't been shown yet. Like I don't know how it hasn't been leaked or anything, so I think it's a surprise. I think it's something that when you actually get to read the book, you'll see it. There's clues. There's clues already in Future State about what it is, but there's a really cool thing in that book that I'm really, really excited about. Yeah. I love. Did you guys read?
Nice.
Did you guys read Last Stories of the DCU, the Death Metal book?
Yeah.
What did you guys? I wrote that.
Yeah,
I wrote that
yep.
Titan story in there with Donna,
Yep.
and all of the Titans. What did you guys think of that one? You can be honest.
I mean, it had all the Titans, so I'm down.
I did so much crazy research on that, and like me, and I know it. So that's an example of being like, as far as I'm concerned, it all happened. Like, every team. I had all the teams in there. There were a lot of people I didn't put in there, and I wish I had. Like, it was tough because
I think you even had the Dan Jurgens Adam.
Because I liked that team.
Those were
so
okay.
I was like, if we're gonna have all these groups in some way or form represented, let's go deep and get this Dan Jurgens team. I was so bad for Risk getting his arm stripped off because he got both of them ripped off. I always liked Argent, so I was like, let's try to find ways of putting more of these characters in there. But even then, there were more I could have added. There was a lot of conversation. What was great about that is that Travis, the artist, Travis Moore, he is a huge Teen Titans fan. And so with him, that's part of why I think it had some of the emotion it had, is because he actually really likes those characters a lot. He knows their history too. And so he was able to put all that into that story. Like he knew things, like I had forgotten about some things in continuity. He was like, well, this character knows this character, so they should do this. And I was like, yeah, you're right. We should totally do that. Let's go. But yeah, I love the Titans and the Teen Titans. I'm excited about this book, and I'm hoping we're able to do more with those characters. I'm a big fan of the sidekicks in the DCU. The generational stuff and the sidekicks in general, like I love all that stuff. It's part of why I'm writing Robin. But I think there'll be more of that stuff this year for sure.
I think it's funny to see Marvel, who really for years kind of bucked the legacy and generation aspect, really triple down on it in the last couple of years. DC's obviously had this for quite some time, but I wonder if this is going to cause some of those same like pre-crisis growing pains that DC had that felt they needed to kind of reboot because, when you start introducing multiple characters, suddenly Peter Parker and Tony Stark are much older than they used to be. And I know that was kind of a big problem with DC, or at least in their head. And I think my hope is that, things like what's happening with Infinite Frontier and everything happening, that people can, continuity is important, but people can let that stuff go and just accept that Peter Parker and Miles Morales can both be there and it just can work fine. And you can have Barry and Wally and Bart and it's okay. And you don't have to think too much about it.
We could think about it, but the answer is there. I mean, I think there is an answer as to why they're younger and why time is so weird. We've answered. It's because of Manhattan. It's because of Crisis. It's because of Perpetua. Like, the reason that Bruce is the age he is, and Dick was aging, and all those things were happening, is because of what those characters did. Like, we put an out, I guess, for those things. So if somebody's oh, what's all this weird stuff with time, and why is this character this age, and how come, Dick was aging and all this stuff, and it's like, oh man, Perpetua did it. That's the answer. Oh, so Manhattan has similar stuff that whole time, Yeah. I mean, if you go back and you look at
they're all clones.
Rebirth, Manhattan was messing with things, or at least watching. He was watching since Crisis on Infinite Earths, he was watching. He was watching pretty much since Watchmen. So,
All right.
It was only until Barry did the Flashpoint that he stepped in because he saw an opening. He saw that reality was reshifted because of what Barry had done, and then he was able to go in there and actually steal stuff and start doing all his, moves and messing with things. But that's why. I mean, there's literally a narrative reason for why those things are the way they are.
Yeah. We've had many questions very similar here, so I'm just gonna instead of specifically asking one of them, we've had numerous people ask about Connor Hawk, Mia Dearden, the Green Arrow family in general, and Aquaman. Characters that never rarely top the charts, but they have very dedicated fans. And they may their books always end, and then they always come back with new series down the road. Any plans for them in Infinite Frontier?
Yeah. So here's what I will say. We'll answer them separate. We'll go from Green Arrow, and then we'll talk about Aquaman. So we'd love to talk about Aquaman, and both of them really. But we'll talk about Green Arrow first. If you I'm a huge Green Arrow fan. I actually was talking about this with one of the editors recently. I sent them a picture of my old office from 3 offices ago, where I had one shelf that was just Green Arrow toys and just Green Arrow stuff. I have a Darwin Cook drawing that he drew for me, a commission of Green Arrow.
Oh wow!
And it's awesome. And I love that cast. And so here's my answer to that. If you are a fan of Green Arrow and the Green Arrow cast, you should definitely read things I'm writing this year. That's the most I'm going to say about that when it comes to Green Arrow. You should definitely read. Yeah, well, no, but it's going to sound really weird, but if you read everything I'm writing in DC, I'm kind of answering your question. You'll see, it's going to be fun. If you guys look at everything I'm doing within a year
from now, that's awesome.
You're going to be like, oh, he wasn't lying. That's the Green Arrow answer. Now Aquaman, being super candid with you guys about Aquaman, we actually talked about me writing Aquaman a couple times over the last year and a half. We had talked about it a few different times. I was hesitant to. I was really weird toward the end of Flash. This time last year, I think I was, I'm gonna use the word cranky. I was definitely still in the zone of my priority was finishing Flash. My priority was getting Death Metal rolling. And so we did talk about Aquaman a few different times, about me working on it. And the timing just wasn't right. That isn't why there's no Aquaman book right now, though. I want to say that. But that was something that came up because I do really like Aquaman. I have Aquaman stories I want to tell. There is a plan for Aquaman. And there are a lot of people at DC who love Aquaman, love that family, love those characters, and everybody wants to do more Aquaman, but I think they want to make sure that it's done right. And you want to make sure that the creators that are working on it are not only people who are super passionate about that character and all of his mythology, but have the time to tell the story they want to tell and do it right. But this is something I've been curious about lately with a lot of these conversations is if your favorite character doesn't have does that diminish that character somehow? And would you rather they have books that just come out monthly, they're just okay because the book has to come out and there has to be a grind involved? Or would you rather have passionate creators be able to take their time and do a really, really great Aquaman book? Me personally, I would rather them take their time and do something that is really, really special. I think that Aquaman is a character that I think kind of needs that. The stuff that Kelly Sue DeConnick was doing and Dan Abnett were doing, a lot of that stuff is really, really great. I enjoy it. Again, he's one of my favorite characters. I actually reread, I want to say, how far back did I go? Last year, when this conversation started about me, whether or not I would do some Aquaman stuff, for this year, it was going to be past Infinite Frontier stuff. We were having conversations. I read a lot of Aquaman. My favorite Aquaman is the Peter David stuff. And so I reread all Peter David. Kind of jumped around. I reread Peter David. I read the Rick Veitch, if I said his last name. The stuff when he had the water hand, after he had come back from the Obsidian Age. that was the stuff that I was reading, and then I went through all of New 52 to present day. And there's a lot of really great stuff in there. As I was reading it, I kept getting more and more ideas for Aquaman. That being said, right now is not the right time for me to do Aquaman, but I know other people who like really want to do Aquaman, and that's the stuff that they're working toward. If you're an Aquaman fan and you're disappointed there isn't anything for you immediately right now, I'm totally sorry about that. But please know that like people at DC really love that character. No one is trying to diminish them in any way. In fact, what they really want to do is they want to make sure that when we come back with Aquaman, that it's something really, really good, and it's something that you'll be happy with, and I think we'll be really proud of. And there's an Aquaman movie coming, so of course there's going to be an Aquaman book. Come on. Like,
Sure.
It's funny, like, Aquaman is a character I really, really like, and it was last year when we were talking about it, the timing just wasn't right. The timing wasn't right. I know they talked to other creators about it, and I really, really enjoyed the Future State Aquaman that just came out that Brandon Thomas did. I thought those issues, I've read both of them. I think they're really good. I read them like every step of the way. I got to see the scripts early on. I think he did a really, really great job. That team and the art on that book was awesome too. But yeah. I think if you're an Aquaman fan, just I hate telling you to be patient because I know it's really hard, and I know it's rough when it's like your favorite character. But no, people.
I think all of us here, we all love Batman and Superman, but I mean, when I think of my favorite characters, I'm thinking of Zatanna and Firestorm and Blue Beetle and Booster Gold, and
Zatanna's in Justice League Dark, those backups.
Yeah, they come and go.
There's a lot of really cool stuff coming with Justice League Dark. There's a reason Blue Beetle and Booster Gold are on the cover of Infinite Frontier. Yeah. There's stuff with them coming. Who's there? Oh, Firestorm. Firestorm is funny. We had a summit a couple of years ago where I think the second day became all of us just talking about Firestorm. Like, we were all just talking about these cool Firestorm ideas. I have a Firestorm statue like right above me right now in my office. And there is a lot of conversation about that character too. And then that character was in Doomsday Clock. Like he was I feel like he was
big role
part of Doomsday Clock. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff with that character too. It's funny, all these characters, like I think when we have these summits, we have these long conversations, like all these characters come up. Like back to Aquaman. Aquaman comes up almost once a day. Like we talk about that character and like what's going on with them, what's coming. I was just talking to one of the editors this morning. We were talking about being glad there's a plan for them. So yeah, every character gets talked about in some form or another. It's just about timing. I don't think you just want these things just to come out because you like want it out. It's like a monkey's paw kind of thing. Like you don't want it just out just because. You want to make sure when it does come out that it's something really cool that you'll be happy with.
I cannot wait for a really great Geoforce story.
Hey, what?
Outsiders, right?
Hold on.
Another
You're
example.
A Geoforce fan. Just give me some time.
All right.
As a retailer, I see these characters come and go pretty regularly, and there will always be Batman and Detective Comics and Action Comics. I mean, I'm not too worried about those, but even Justice League comes and goes. I mean, very few of these books, they just don't run forever, and there's been gaps and there's been holes where they haven't been around, and then suddenly things relaunch, and Hawkman's perfect example. The Robert Venditti run was amazing after
I don't know how you follow
a couple of years of not great Hawkman. I'll just say that. Not my favorite.
I don't even know how Hawkman's tough. I was thinking about Hawkman. I mean, Robert put so much into that book. And, I remember when he did the presentation for it almost 3 years ago now, I guess. He did a presentation talking about his plans for it and the stuff he wanted to do with it. And you knew he had really invested a lot into that book. And so I almost feel like it's okay for some of these books to have like a happy ending for a little bit. And then, like you said, you can come back around and do something really big with it a little bit later. Like, I think it's okay to rest.
I've sold people on those first 12 issues as basically All-Star Hawkman because it is the Brian Hitch.
Yeah, for sure. They should definitely collect that as like a really nice deluxe hardcover. Those first 12 issues. I mean, the fact you have Brian Hitch for 12 issues in a row was also amazing. I mean, I like Brian a lot. I was shocked he did that, but it's also great that he talks about this online about how like he learned stuff about himself as an artist by doing those 12 issues in a row. Like he was like, I'm going to make this happen. And it's a great book. Like that book was solid all the way through. Everything all the way to the ending.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And it has a happy ending. Like that last issue was a great issue. It's perfect, and it has this great happy ending. And that's why part of me is like, let's rest those characters for a minute. Let them have that happy ending for a little bit, and then because you bring them back, that means something must have happened. It's like Die Hard. It's gonna sound really silly, right? Like you watch the first Die Hard movie. And it's this crazy experience that he goes through. And then we didn't just like follow John McClane like around as a regular cop again. The next time we saw him was when someone tried to take over the airport because something bad happened, right? It's okay to let these characters get to have that little happy ending, and then we get to throw some crazy stuff at them.
I mean, John didn't really have a happy ending. I mean, marriage fell apart, and
well, that's a whole other thing. If you only watch the first two, it's like, all right, cool, he did it.
Yeah.
I rewatched whichever, I think it's the fourth one. Was it Live Free or Die Hard?
Yeah.
I watched that a few weeks ago, and yeah, it's so crazy that it's like how much of a bummer his life became.
Okay, now it has to be asked because you brought it up. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Oh my god! Yes, of course it is. Yes! Like it has all the tropes of a Christmas movie. And come on, it takes place at Christmas.
Yeah, there's a Christmas rap song on the soundtrack.
Yeah, we watch Christmas. We watch it at Christmas, around Christmas. I usually end up watching that or Batman Returns either on Christmas Eve, almost every year. My wife and I have like 6 movies that are Christmas movies we watch in December every year, and Die Hard's one of them. Batman Returns, Home Alone 1, Home Alone 2, a few others, but yeah, it's definitely a Christmas movie. I think when people don't want it to be a Christmas movie, they're just being stubborn at this point.
Me stubborn? Never.
Well, Ryan, you guys have convinced me to finally read that Hawkman book.
Fantastic.
You haven't read the Hawkman book?
It's really good.
Brock, look, going back to Crisis, okay? As a kid, this was the clearest thing. Earth 1 Hawkman was a space cop. Earth 2 Hawkman was a reincarnated Egyptian prince. The end. No one was confused. As an adult, I am beyond confused.
I feel like by the time Jeff was reintroducing Hawkman, he had answered all the questions, and then somehow it got all confused again. And I think that Robert, of course, Robert is not a big DC nerd. Like he knows it really well now, but he's not. Like he's not a huge hardcore DC nerd.
He could have fooled anyone with that Hawkman run.
But that's it, though. Like, he took on a character that had one of the craziest continuities and was like, I'm going to make it work. And he did. He made it work. Yep. So if you are confused about that stuff, or you're just like, oh my god, this stuff, because then you get Hawkworld involved. Like, once you start getting everything in there, it definitely, but I feel like Robert answered all of it. I love that book. I would text Robert every time it came out and be like, oh man, this issue was really good, dude. Like every time new issue of Hawkman.
I think that and Freedom Fighters are like the 2 sleeper books that not enough people read, and they really need to go back.
Yeah, for sure. We reference Freedom Fighters very lightly in Death Metal, in one of the Death Metal issues. I was asking Robert questions about it as I was writing it, just because I wanted to figure out how to tie some of that stuff together.
Well, I'm gonna get my question in here as we're talking about characters coming back, and we're talking about Brian Hitch as well. He drew a couple pages in Death Metal 7 with the Justice Society, and I definitely one of my favorite teams and characters. And that page had that was like the full Jeff Johns, Liberty Bell and other characters hadn't really been connected to him before. JSA again have come and gone through the years. It's been quite some time.
I know there is a plan. I cannot talk about That's my answer. That is my
Okay.
there is a plan. And I think people will be happy, but that's the most I can say. They are referenced in there is a scene at their headquarters in Infinite Frontier Zero. That's the most I think I can say.
Okay. Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Question from, well, not so much of a question, but comment from Ron. He says, I just want to say, really enjoyed your Justice League Death Metal tie-in issues. Lots of fun and awesome character work. Thank you. And those were very fun issues, by the way. I'll agree with
Thanks.
that.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun working on those.
He also said, a Detective Chimp, Lobo, and Harley Quinn team-up book, please. That would be...
I bet we can make that happen. I'm going to write that. You said Lobo, so it was Lobo...
Detective Chimp and Harley. That's
Harley?
I love that team. That's a great team.
Dude, I will ask because it's funny, especially with Marie. I think Marie sometimes, if you come at her with like, "I got this crazy idea," she will listen. So I will definitely bring that up. I know there's cool stuff with all those characters. I mean, Harley's new book that Riley Rossmo was doing with Stephanie. That book is great. I actually got to read the first issue a few weeks ago, and it's really solid. And that's also a big thing. Is like Harley. This gives you examples of like Harley books have really been kind of on their own. They're on their like in a side continuity a lot of times.
Yeah,
and
very self-contained.
Yeah. I think when Sam Humphries was doing it, he started bringing it a little bit closer. But that new Harley book is super in continuity. I mean, it directly references what's going on in the Bat books post Infinite Frontier Zero. It references Joker War. It like highly, it's. I don't want to say it's dependent on Joker War, but it very is connected to stuff that happened in Joker War. But that book is great. It's a lot of fun. There's a couple sequences in there that are really, really cool.
From Comic Boom on Twitter, they ask, does the Orrery of Worlds even exist? And what is the deal with Earth 1, 2, 3, the multiverse? And part of that, I mean, there's basically like a multiverse of multiverses right now, the Omniverse.
Yeah. So, it's the map from Multiversity that we saw in Metal and Death Metal. That map now, it re-exists. It's been brought back. Everything's back in the place it's been. There's a scene where President Superman and Barry are talking about it. Some of those worlds got their histories restarted, but those worlds still exist. The main Earth that our heroes are on is Earth Zero, and then if you look at the literally go back and look at the Multiversity guide. That's the guide we use. The biggest change is there's going to be a bunch of new worlds and new multiverses that are now existing on the outside of those barriers that are growing and getting bigger. 2 worlds. This is mentioned at the end of Death Metal 7. There are 2 worlds. One that is now at the center. And that is the one that they were calling the Elseworld. Right. And then you're going to find out, in that issue we talk about there is another world. And in Infinite Frontier Zero, you find out that there is another world that is further out. It is the polar opposite of the Elseworld. And we'll be talking about what that world is a little bit in Infinite Frontier Zero and how that world impacts the rest of the DCU. But yeah, all that stuff is still there. We talk about it a little bit in Infinite Frontier Zero. There's other stuff coming this year that'll get deeper into referencing some of that multiversity stuff and referencing some of the stuff from the Oreo. Or how do you say it? The Oreo of Worlds? That always sounds like Oreos to me. Yeah.
Orrery. I think it's Orrery.
We will see some of that stuff in this year for sure.
Your mention of the Elseworld. I mean, that actually made me curious because clearly for longtime DC fans, a clear reference to Elseworlds, the kind of DC's version of What If that have been, existed since the 80s when DC started to take these sort of alternate takes on their titles. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and after years of Elseworlds not existing, I kind of read that as Elseworlds coming back as a thing. Is that a good read, or is there more to it, or is this something
more
different?
To it. I don't want to tell you no, but I will say you'll be surprised once we get to Elseworld and you see what it is.
Okay, because. Well,
no. I can't get too deep into what Elseworld is. That is a big mystery that's going to be building over the next year, or at least in this next like calendar year stories we're telling. But you're going to start being able to figure out what it is.
Well, at least from
once you start rolling, you'll start seeing what it is. What?
Yeah, from a reader point of view, I mean, Elseworld, all Elseworlds are is just pre-crisis alternate worlds. I mean, that as a reader, that's kind of what I assume. So the Red Rain world is out there, and Gotham by Gaslight, and even in like
all those worlds
Countdown.
All those worlds are in Multiversity.
Yeah, and all those Elseworlds have come back through Countdown and the Crisis. So it's like they're not this sort of like I know New 52 was like, no, it's not a parallel world, it's a new publishing line. It's like, well, no, it's not. it's just it's part of the whole thing, and the Elseworlds too. So yeah, I'm real curious about that. Deneric asks, we'll be seeing Superboy Prime again. I know we just got a conclusion to his redemption arc, but I missed that kid already.
I don't want to tell someone there's no plans for that character. I do think that was like a really great ending that Jeff gave Superboy Prime. We had started talking about Superboy Prime almost 3 years ago. I mean, he came up all the time. Let me tell you, Super Prime was always in the conversation. We were always like, how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we use Superboy Prime? And it was always like, if you're going to use him because of the kind of character he is, it has to be something a really, really a special reason. And he came up a few years ago, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to use him or not. We started talking about it a lot, and then it was really great that Jeff was able to get involved and write that one issue. But I think part of it was like being able to not rest that character, but give them a happy ending and give him a redemption arc. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. It's like, now that he's had this redemption arc, let's let him have that for a little bit. I think if anybody's going to bring him back, it'll be Jeff, though. Yeah. And I don't know if Jeff has plans for him at this point, but I think if anybody should bring him back, it should be Jeff. But just that Jeff gave him a nice happy ending.
Yeah. For the record, I love Dickhead Superboy Prime, like ripping people's arms off and stuff. That's my favorite. So
yeah, he is awesome.
It was really good.
Yeah, everything with him is cool. One of my favorite stories with him is Legion of Three Worlds.
Oh yeah,
that was I love that storyline with him. I mean, obviously, like I said before, I'm a big fan of Infinite Crisis and the role he played in that, and the arc that he had in that, of going from being this kid to being this villain, was so great. When I got to read the script for the stuff that Jeff was writing, the stuff that Jeff and Scott were doing for that special, I was like, oh man, yeah, this is just nails it. It's so good. All this stuff with crypto.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, Jeff's going for it. It was good.
No, it was a good redemption of the character too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's what we all wanted to do. That was when we had a conversation about 3 years ago. It was May of 2018. Scott, James, and I were on this crazy convention tour over a weekend where I flew from Portland to Florida to Phoenix, like just crossing the country. And in that weekend, we started talking about the Batman Who Laughs versus Superboy Prime. And we knew we had to do it eventually. We had to. And yeah, I'm glad we got to do it. Like, I'm glad that we were able to pull that one shot off. We always knew we wanted to do something with him, and that always kind of was like one of the goals. So yeah, we tried our hardest to make it happen. We were able to get it to happen.
From John, and I'm actually going to expand on this question just a little bit. Yeah. He said, will the Endless be mentioned in this new era? And I'll fully expand it out to basically any of those Vertigo characters. Obviously Swamp Thing and John Constantine have appeared regularly and will, but there's Doom Patrol kind of come and go. But Animal Man, Shade the Changing Man. I mean, these are my favorite comics of all time.
Yeah, I mean, Animal Man comes up all the time. I know there are a lot of people that want to work on him. I know there's certain creators, Zach and Lonnie, who've done books for Vault, and they did some stuff at Marvel, but they do a lot of stuff with Vault and Aftershock. They really want to write Animal Man a lot. I hope I'm not ruining that for anybody or ruining that for them. I don't think they make it secret though. Animal Man just came up yesterday, like in a conversation. So I know there are plans. People want to do stuff with Animal Man. I think it's just a matter of like when, and making sure it's the right project and it's good and cool.
Sandman must be a different beast,
yeah,
though.
Sandman is a whole other thing. I mean, obviously, Neil, they've been doing so much with that Sandman stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really. I personally have not been in a conversation that is like, let's bring them in and use them.
Yeah, because when Morpheus appeared in Metal 1, I mean, that was a pretty major shock. He didn't appear too much later through the series, but that was like, what? Like,
yeah, let me tell you a story about that. When we got the first proof for Metal number 1, it was like it was San Diego Comic-Con. It was a few days before it was gonna go to print, and we had all these conversations. Is anybody gonna care about that ending, about that last page? And I was like, I think people will care. It was interesting to see who in our group were like, I don't know if anyone's gonna know who that is. Some people being like, people are gonna know, and we were at this sushi restaurant and we got a printout of it, and I was reading it right there at the table, like checking it and talking to Scott, James, and a couple editors, just looking at it. And then again, Robert Venditti was sitting next to me. He came a little bit late, and he was sitting next to me at the sushi restaurant. And I was like, I'm gonna have Robert read it. Let's let Robert read it, because if Robert is somebody who is not like a hardcore DC person, he knows it now. Obviously, being at DC for as long as he was, he knows DC stuff now, but he's not as hardcore as say like I am about things. I was like, let's let Robert read it and see what happens. So Robert reads it, and I remember he had his glasses, and he got to that last page, and literally in the restaurant went, "Holy shit!" And I was like, "Did it? All right, cool. Yep, this is gonna be good. Let's roll with it." But yeah, with those characters, none of the conversations I'm in do they ever really come up.
Yeah.
And I think because right now the stuff they're doing with those actual books that Neil's been working on, that's where you, if you're looking for those characters, that's where you want to go.
All right. From Clark, he says, does the next Batman being on the cover of Infinite Frontier #0 mean he'll be making the jump into the main continuity? And I know this has been a big conversation around the Future State titles in general.
I don't feel like this is, I mean, nobody, here's what I would say to that is you should definitely read Batman. Like, he is in Infinite Frontier 0. You should definitely read Batman.
And next Batman is actually pretty close future-wise. It's not that far off.
It's not that far. Yeah, that's part of what I would say is that
time-wise.
You should definitely read Batman. If you're enjoying that stuff, you should definitely read Batman and some of the Batman books, like obviously Detective and Batman Urban Legend. I think those 3 books in particular are things you should look at. When it comes to Tim Fox or Jace, read Batman, but then also read the digital first book that's coming out. It's going to be weekly. It starts coming out at the end of February. That'll answer some of those questions. But he's in it.
And all those digital first books do get published eventually. So
yeah, they do get published. That came up a couple times this week of making sure that was something that we always do, and make sure that's an option for retailers. And getting it out there if you're not a digital person.
This is from Sagavan, and I mean, we're just going to ask the big question: will the events of Infinite Frontier lead to another relaunch of DC's continuity?
Not as far as I know.
It's the Uncrisis. That was Metal, right? It's
the Anti-Crisis.
Anti-Crisis. Yeah.
No. I that isn't something I'm personally interested in. At every meeting I'm having, none of that stuff ever comes up. Nobody is ever like, "Oh, let's need to do it again. Let's reboot the continuity and start from scratch." Like, that's never the conversation. I mean, the stuff we're talking about right now, I could tell you. As far as the conversations I'm having right now, we've been talking about things going into like summer of 2022 right now. Like there's conversations. I said this to somebody else recently, where it was like James and I a few weeks ago were talking about something that happens in the last week of March of 2022. Like we're like we know that's when it's coming out. Like we know, that's when that issue's coming out. This is what's happening, and we've been having a lot of these conversations. None of those conversations are let's reboot or let's, and that's what I'm saying. That's a day. But that is none of those conversations. I have never heard that ever as a conversation of let's do that. It's just, especially now where it's like, no, we it's pretty wild right now because, it is a 10-year anniversary of Flashpoint, like right now.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that crazy? I was thinking about this because, Flashpoint #1, I think, came out, whatever it was, like April or May, I think, of 2011. We just got it all back. Why would we throw it all away? Like, if we can use all that stuff, if we can bring these characters back, and we can play with all these toys, let's play with them. Let's use all that continuity, let's use all that history and move forward with it and just have some fun with it. I personally am not interested in that. You could tell when I was working on Flash, like I was every story I was trying to like get stuff back, and I was always fighting to get the Flash family back and getting all these characters and, after doing all of that, and I think with all these other things, it's more about just taking all that stuff and now just moving on to the next chapter. And that's what a lot of Infinite Frontier is about, is showing all of these characters moving on to the new chapters of their life, like taking everything that happened and saying, okay, now we're moving on to this next chapter. Like Wonder Woman, at the end of Death Metal, she went through this ascension, and now in Infinite Frontier, she's going through this ascension. She goes up in front of the Quintessence, and they offer her a place of money. They're like, do you want to join the Quintessence? And she's like, well, I was warned of a cost, of a threat. I have to go find out what that is first and see what's going on. I can't leave knowing there could be a danger out there. And so her and the Spectre go on the journey to try to figure out what that is. And in the process of that, they get to witness all of these different characters across the all being brave in the face of change, in the face of going into this new unknown or starting these new chapters. And that's a big part of what Infinite Frontier is about. And so it's about moving to a new chapter. We're not starting a new book.
Right. Well, and I think what you said earlier about, you just get everything back. Why would you reboot? I always kind of look at this stuff not only from a story point of view as a fan, but a retailer point of view. And, Marvel, after they didn't reboot their continuity, but they rebooted their books over and over and over for a few years there, and it really hurt their sales. DC New 52 was kind of the first time they've done that in any modern fans, reading experience on that level, right? I think they got away with it with Rebirth just because fandom kind of rejected New 52. If they did it again, from a sales point of view, I just don't think it would be there.
Well, look at Infinite Frontier. I mean, already those books. I mean, Justice League isn't getting a #1.
Yeah, right. And that's important. From a lot of readers, they like that.
Yeah,
they like
Batman is 106. I think there's opportunities sometimes when you do a #1. I think you have to do it right, and if you see it's the right opportunity, not just because you're starting a new story arc, I do feel like can be diminishing returns at times.
Absolutely.
If you're doing something that is so drastically different, like I will use an example of like the Hulk. I think I'm glad there's an Immortal Hulk #1.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And very different take.
Different take. So I do feel like there's situations like that you can do that. But, I don't know. It's pretty wild when I started really reading comics and getting like hardcore into it. They weren't doing as much of that. Both Marvel and DC. There weren't like a crazy amount of #1s. Even when you look at something like Zero Hour, yes, there were a lot of #1s after 0 Hour because you had like Starman, but actually there wasn't that many. It was like Starman and Manhunter and a few others. But Legion of Superheroes, I think, got super rebooted after 0 Hour. But they just picked up with those numbers.
Yeah, it just kept going.
They kept going, and I love that era. It's my favorite era of Legion of Superheroes. And so, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of plans for that. There's going to be books that are going to have #1, but it's books that have had that time to kind of rest. So, like, Robin is getting #1, but there hasn't been a Robin book for a long time. Even with the stuff that Patrick Gleason was doing with Son of the Bat, that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think things like that, but yeah, I don't think there's any plan right now to do any like hardcore reboot. It's really funny. I don't want to say there's a frustration at times, But I see people sometimes they'll call every time we start like a new narrative, they call it a reboot, and I'm like, no, like it's just I guess you can call it. There's a difference between a relaunch and a reboot,
Right.
yes. But DC is such a funny place because I think ever since New 52, it kind of solidified this history of DC starting over in a weird way. Even though it's funny when you go back and look at like Crisis on Infinite Earths and how pieces of that were totally started over and then some of it wasn't.
Well, that's what
Like-
Kevin was saying a little bit ago, right? I mean, yeah, it took a long time for some. I mean, Batman just kind of kept rolling, and there's like a technical. I think like 401 is like considered like the first Batman. 401 is the first like post-crisis, but it's like it's just the next issue of Batman. It's not.
Yeah, and we reference that stuff. I mean, look at the Teen Titans and how much stuff is referenced from Teen Titans pre-Crisis that we reference, or even something like Infinity and some of the JSA stuff. I mean, we definitely pick and choose in times, and I think there's a conversation we have about some of that stuff. There's weird little continuity bits. Like I personally like the fact that Jason Todd's parents pre-Crisis were killed by Killer Croc. I've always liked that as part of his character. I liked a lot of that stuff about him, and none of that exists now. Like that did not happen in continuity. There are days where I wish we could like fudge it somehow, or be like, well, that wasn't his real mom, and that's why his mom was over here. You know, like I wish there's ways of kind of like messing with some of that stuff. But yeah, it just depends. I think with some of those little bits of continuity. But yeah, there's no plan. Sorry, there's no plan, at least as far as I'm in a conversation about, of being like, let's reboot it and start over. Not right now.
No.
I don't think, just on the conversation I've had with people, I don't think that's anyone's interested. And honestly, we don't really need it. Like, you can easily look at what Robert did with Hawkman. You can take every piece and you can tell an amazing story with all of the pieces on the table. Just gotta do it. You have to put the work in.
Yeah, you know, I think if there's a new Aquaman book, you know, at this point, sure, a new #1 is fine. It'll probably have a different feel to it. The book's been off the table for a little while, but
I mean, if I was doing Aquaman right now, I would definitely look at all the continuity. I know there's some challenges there because of there's a lot of reasons. There's different stuff here and there. You think about the kids, and you think about there's a lot of heavy lifting I think to be done with continuity with him. But I would find a way. I would find a way to play with it.
All right, we got a couple questions left, but this is a big one, obviously. Roy Harper, near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, regardless of whatever you think of the events surrounding his death. Clearly, he shows up in Metal, right? Still dead, but very active. What could people expect for Roy?
I would
Much you could talk about?
How do I put this? Listen, just read Infinite Frontier Zero. Like, listen, I'll just tell you that. Just read Infinite Frontier Zero. That's my answer for that. And just know that I love Roy. So that is my.
I do like Roy Harper quite a bit. We'll see. I'm excited to see if they long-term plans for that character. These guys are never gone for too long. You know, some of these questions we got, you know, basically characters of different origins. You know, how does that work? Is from Steph. You know, and I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. You know, I've always felt, you know, if books have. If the story needs to acknowledge one version of an origin versus another, I mean, I guess it's worth bringing up. But you know, I'm going to guess there isn't like real hard, fast rules for you guys on this stuff, or is there?
You can no. I mean, it depends on who the editor is. I think at the end of the day, it always comes down to can you tell the best story you can.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a different writer from other people. I would try to find a way to look at all of it and try to find a way to make it all work. There's a character I'm working on now for later this year, and I went back through and I looked at all the different origins they've had and the different tweaks to it and the different, you know, weird scenarios that have kind of involved their origin, how their origin has changed and evolved over the years. And my solution is like, I'm going to find a way to make it all work. Yeah, it just depends. It depends on the character. It depends on the continuity. Can you come up with a good answer to why you? And then also, you have to say why are you using it. When I was on Flash, we would always talk about these characters and the stuff I wanted to do, and I couldn't just do it just because. I had to find a reason for the story to need it, and if I could find a reason to use it, that was always a win. And I got to do it. So it depends on your editor sometimes when you're talking about this stuff. Yeah, it just depends. It depends on the book, the project, where you're coming at it from, and I don't want to give people like a Wikipedia entry. I want to give you a book, a story and character and all these pieces, and uses those things as tools to tell the story. It shouldn't be the only thing. And I also don't want to repeat all that stuff and make it like a math problem that I'm trying to present in front of you. It's like you want to tell a story.
Well, I think I don't want to speak for you, obviously, but I'll speak for probably most of us on this podcast and a lot of fans. I mean, I don't think anyone has done a better origin recap than the first page of All-Star Superman. That one is just like, dying sure. Planet, right? Kindly parent, kindly couple. It's like,
and then boom, Superman. Yeah, I just looked at that yesterday.
That's all you need.
Yeah, I was looking at it again, I was thinking about something else that we're working on this year, and I was like, how did he actually do it? Or how did Frank quietly actually do this page? And so I went through and was looking at it, and yeah, it's an amazing opening.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not every character, I mean, I don't think you could maybe quite do that with Hawkman. His continuity was a little bit more confusing, but with a Batman or a Superman or Wonder Woman or some of these characters, I think you can distill it down. Well, if you could distill it down to that, pure essence. I mean, I think even Green Lantern and Flash and most of the main characters, you can really, whittle away the additional layers that have been added to that core.
I'll use Robin as an example. The first page of Robin #1, I essentially just touched on the beats that I felt were really important.
And this is the Damian Wayne for people that don't know.
So Damian Wayne, Robin #1. I was like, I just want to touch on the beats that are important. So it's like, what is the information the reader has to know? Damian's gone through a lot. So I was like, all right, what is the information that everyone needs to know? And it's like, okay, he is the son of Batman. That is a need to know. You need to know that, Kal is his father, Rachel is his grandfather. You need to know that. And then I was like, I feel like, me personally, I wanted to show he had this friendship with John. And he had this friendship with other younger characters, and he worked with the Teen Titans. And then I wanted to show that he had a falling out with Batman. Those are the 3 beats that were kind of important to me, that I was like, I feel like the reader must know these before they start this book. I could get lost in talking about everything. I get lost all the stuff that happened with Teen Titans and the stuff that's gone on in his book, and him dying and being brought back and getting all that kind of stuff. But I was like, no, these are the things that I think to start this book that you absolutely need to know, these 3 beats. And then after that, I'll start referencing stuff that happened and dealing with the rest of that continuity. But page 1, those are the 3 things I think you absolutely need to know.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier. I mean, if it's important to the story, it's worth bringing up. And, I mean, Superman's origins have always maintained, a lot of similarities. There's changes, obviously, whether the Kents are alive or not. But I mean, as long as you get those basics, the details can come out and can be fleshed out later in the story. And if your story needs to explain it, then I think it's worth it. But if it's not, it's like, does it really matter?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's funny, like, sometimes there are people that are just really hardcore about that continuity. And
of course.
Yeah.
So a couple left is from Man Bat on Twitter, and I think this is actually a really important question to answer, because I think this goes back to some of those kind of maybe bad rumors and misunderstandings people had. He says, are all the monthly books on the same Earth? Are things like Tom Taylor's Nightwing and the Teen Titans Academy on the same Earth, and are they interconnected?
Yes, they're on the same Earth. The only books that I know are not, obviously, I mean, there's no secret. Like, the Crime Syndicate world, that's that book.
Right, like, it's Earth 3, right?
Yeah, on Earth 3. Everything is on the same.
Yeah.
That's really funny, because that's what I thought the twist was going to be after that was what I thought the twist was going to be after Infinite Crisis. I thought there was going to be a twist that they were on different Earths or something like that, but that's not. But no, that they're all in the same Earth.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing that goes back to those rumors of like, oh, no continuity, oh, everything's disconnected, oh, nothing, everything happened, but nothing matters. And I'm like, nah, why would they ever do that? That feels so.
Well, there's what's weird about that is it's not like DC has always been this monolith of only one continuity. Like,
oh, sure.
There's been Elseworlds, there's been minis that you're just like, we're just doing this book that takes place over here. I mean, I have this giant Batman shelf in my office. So I have a shelf that is like, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's like a giant bookshelf, 6 shelves high, and it's just Batman. And not all those stories take place on the same. I don't even say the same Earth. They're just stories at times. Like there are times where it's like, here is this weird Batman book we're gonna do, and there was some stuff that were even predating. I guess there wasn't that much predating Gaslight, but there's just a bunch of different Batman books up there. You look at something like Azzarello's Joker. It's like that's a Joker story.
Well, as Alan Moore said, they're all imaginary stories, right?
All imaginary stories, yeah. So,
aren't they all?
Like they're on a different world somewhere in the multiverse. If that's what you want to go, and some writer wants to figure that out, that's totally cool. But yeah, it's a funny thing. It's like DC's never been this monolith that only creates one thing. I mean, look at the digital stories they've been doing with Titans and Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. Those are all they're just cool stories of those characters.
Well, we have Sean Murphy's Batman universe that's going on right now.
Yeah, and that's
yeah, that's a great example. It's its own Batman little verse.
Well, and Kevin here, I know we talk more regularly, probably than most people ever, about Bob Haney's Brave and the Bold stuff of just the. In the 60s, his whole idea was what continuity doesn't matter. Who cares? I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And it led to some of the wackiest stories ever. But it's
for sure. Well, look
fascinating.
At Batman Universe, like when Bendis and Nick Darrington.
Yeah.
That's just a cool Batman story.
Jonah Hex pops up in it. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Who does?
Jonah Hex.
Oh, Jonah Hex. Yeah. Yeah, I remember when that book was coming out. I was getting copies of it early. I was getting like PDFs of it early, and before it was even out there, before it was on like the Walmart books or whatever, the giants, I was getting it, and I was printing the PDFs out just so I could read them in print. And I printed out like the first 3 issues worth, and I went to a convention, and me and the other creators were reading them. So it was like me and Tom King and Matt Rosenberg and a few others. And we're reading them, just those printouts that I had in my bag. And we were all like, "Man, this is so much fun!" It was such a cool book. I think it's probably the best thing Bendis has done at DC as Batman Universe.
It was really funny, or really fun. Yeah, it was also funny too, but it was a really fun book.
Funny. Yeah, but it's Jonah Hex in it. It has all the stuff with Hal and they go back to Jonah Hex and the stuff with Deathstroke and Green Arrow and the Riddler. There's a lot of really good stuff in there.
That almost was like a modern version of a Haney book, and I say that with all affection and love.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a couple questions that are a little bit more general and kind of away from Infinite Frontier, but we could do one last one here from Craig, who says, what question have you not been asked that you think you should have been asked that you can actually answer? So if you've got anything that but we got a retailer question too, which I'll get to that in a second. But if you've got a something you want to tease, or if there's if we've all been kind of avoiding a big topic, like this is the time.
No, I don't think so. I mean, with Infinite Frontier, we can talk about what it is. I think I have a little bit of it being this book about showing the DCU moving to a new chapter. I don't think anyone has asked me a question that I feel like I have to answer, or is, I don't know, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. I feel like we've covered most of the stuff about it. Like, at least in terms of characters and things that are going on this year.
Yeah.
Infinite Frontier Zero, it really is like the beginning of this new era for DC. And you're not going to get every answer I think you want in it, but it's going to begin to start giving you some answers, but also setting up a lot of mysteries on the table that if you're a big DC fan like myself, or even if you're kind of casual coming in, you're going to get something to it's going to make you want to read more of the DCU. I can't think of any question that I feel like I'm missing with this. I don't know. We can talk about what it is from a retailer perspective. But yeah, I can't think of anything that I'm like, oh no, someone asked me about this. Also, because I know there are questions about this. I do know there are questions that haven't been asked, but they might be too spoilery. Like I don't want to get too deep into stuff and be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what happens in this issue.
Got to leave some mystery.
But it's something where you know what I haven't been asked? Oh man, maybe I shouldn't say this. I haven't been asked. This is a really weird one. All right, I haven't been asked if anybody dies in it.
Oh.
And somebody dies in it, but I haven't been asked if anyone's died, so that's the answer.
It's actually very interesting you bring that up, because I was just about to say there's a history of these type of books, especially at the modern, like Dan Didio to current era, and they've remained some of my favorites, including Countdown to Infinite Crisis and the DC Universe Rebirth special, and someone dying in the Countdown to Infinite Crisis was a major point of that story that led to just numerous changes to DC in a while. So,
yeah, I mean, I can here. Hold on, I'm gonna look at it right now. I'm gonna go through and maybe spoil some stuff here. Let me pull it up. I have it on my iPad. All right, so we go in order here. All right, so we have characters coming together for the first time. We have characters like new team ups, new alliances in it. A major character dies, and then we have new characters kind of getting new roles, introductions to new characters kind of talking about things they haven't talked about before in the past. A lot of new, new alliances, and like I said before, it's a lot of new chapters in people's lives. You have all the kids coming to Titan's Island. All the new kids that are coming in there. We hint on some stuff about Red X. The John Kent Superman stuff is really cool, and you get to have a cool insight to him as a character.
And you said that I'm blanking on the name of on the team now. That was in the end of Metal, the hero and villain team.
Oh, the Totality. The
Totality. There you go. Thank you.
The Totality are mentioned in here, and we get a little bit more. You'll get more of them later in the year. There's other stuff coming. Not later in the year, but you'll get stuff after this issue. Then we have a character coming back. Then you have this really, really cool Stargirl scene that has cool stuff in it about stuff that's coming. And then you get more crazy Batman stuff that happens. You get some new team-ups again. Characters going into, new chapters of their life, new adventure. And then you get a really cool, I personally feel is a cool scene with the Flashes with Barry and Wally. And then you get a crazy ending. So that is the special in a nutshell. Going through it really quickly, flipping through it right now.
Well, one of our good friends, longtime listeners, and also comic retailer Travis, he says, "What is if you have to pitch for retailers to tell customers? Again, we're your customers, right? We're DC's customers. Sure. How do we sell this to our customers? What's your, because you were on the retailer end of this for a little bit, so what's your?
Yeah, I feel like the easy answer, I guess I could give you that sounds silly, possibly, is just this is the beginning of a new chapter of the DCU. Big events happen in it, and you should definitely want to read this. There's really cool stuff that happens in it, cool creative teams, and has a cool ending that's going to propel throughout the year. So if you're a DC fan, you should want to check this out. Now, when I was working at a store, I worked at a store all through high school, all through college, and a little bit after. I remember when Countdown to Infinite Crisis came out, and personally, I was just I knew who came in who read DC Comics, right? I knew my customer base. I knew who came in who read DC. And my answer was always you have to read this. You have to read it. That was almost my selling pitch. You have to read it. Oh, it's so good. You're a DC fan, you have to read this. When it came to somebody who was brand new, who wasn't really a big reader, I was kind of this is a launching point. This is a stepping on point for DC. So if you've been kind of nervous about reading DC recently, you should check this one out. those are my answers for that. I feel like if you're a retailer, you know which customers come in that are big DC fans. You know which ones have the pulls. You should definitely have them check this out and at least give it to them to look at and try to push on them the idea of like it being this important issue that a lot of stuff that's going to come up in the next year starts here. Some stuff I also want to say this: if you are a DC fan and you just want to read Batman, this might get me in trouble. I don't know. You don't have to read this. I do think you really should, because the stuff that happens in it is going to be referenced in all the Bat books, and it's going to be something that is going to be a major impact on the entire Bat line. And the same thing with Justice League and Superman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and the Flashes. All of those things are impacted by this book. So you should definitely, if you want to know what's going on with those characters and kind of get the beginning point, like a prelude to those stories, this is the place to get it. And in some cases, those books are so greatly impacted by what happens in this. So if you're already reading those books, you should definitely check it out. If you're a retailer, I think you just, you got to sell to them as this is the beginning of this new era of DC, and you should just check it out.
You know, we have we use a point of sale system called Comic Hub, and Travis uses it too. And one of the great parts about it is we can basically target target customers that buy certain books. And my pitch to this out to people that, you know, subscribers of Batman and Flash and Wonder Woman, Justice League, were exactly what you said. You know, this is the next chapter. This is the first chapter in all the next stories for all these characters. You're reading Batman. You probably want this. Look, there's no obligation to take it. I'm not going to force people to buy this stuff, but we're going to pull you one. This is the email I sent out to customers. If you get it and you don't want it, bring it right back and no obligation. But we think you're going to want this. And I've done this for things like Rebirth. We actually gave Rebirth out to every customer at the store for free.
That's great.
Because we were like, you are going to want this. This is the pitch for everything going forward. We've done it with some other books, you know, where it's like, I don't tend to cross pull for like nearly every customer in the store, but occasionally it's worth it. And this is one of those books. I'm hoping
it's going to be one of those things where, especially with the Bat books, where if you're reading the Bat books after, you're going to be like, when did that happen? Like, when is this big thing that everyone's talking about? When did that happen? Like, that will be what will be happening if you're reading any of the Bat books after. Because they're all going to reference the stuff that happened in Infinite Frontier Zero. Same thing, like I said, with Flash and Green Lantern. Some of them are lighter than others in some places. But at the end of the day, they all are sort of important, I think, to the moving narrative of all of those characters. And then deeper and deeper you're going to get into the year, you're going to be like, when did that happen? And it's always going to come back down to Infinite Frontier Zero.
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting with this book because I think, you know, it's funny with Rebirth, right? Like Rebirth, I think Rebirth, the issue that Jeff did, I think is one of the most important DC comics ever, right? And at the time, maybe from my perspective, there was so much hype around it. But once it actually came out, that hype doubled. You know, I think once people got a chance to read it and were able to sit down and like actually see what Rebirth was and the amount of emotion that Jeff put into that work, I think it doubled the interest in not only Rebirth, but the DC books that were coming out after that. With this, you know, I've been definitely trying to push it with retailers and talking with people, but I think once people actually get a chance to read it and then you see what it actually is and the events that happen in it, then you're going to be like, oh shit. Like, I think that's something that will happen with this as well.
Yeah, that's great. I know Toby, his favorite story of mine is I was on my honeymoon when Rebirth came out.
Oh, were you really? Oh my god!
And I loaded
up his honeymoon.
We were in Paris, and I loaded up my tablet and downloaded Rebirth to read it digitally because I'm like, I mean, I'm on my honeymoon, but I have to read Rebirth. I'm very sorry.
I was really
my wife is mostly understanding.
That's really funny. I was really lucky with some of this stuff. I got to read Rebirth really early, like even through most of the process. I got to read it early, and I'm really glad I got to have it that way because I think this is like a selfish way to talk about this, but. You know, I think Rebirth, not it didn't get leaked, but, you know, information about Rebirth special kind of got out there before it came out. And so some of that information, if you're like a hardcore DC fan and you kind of keep up what's going on, bits and pieces of it for you were probably not ruined, but you kind of figure out ahead of time. The only part of Rebirth that I was sort of told on the phone. So the way Rebirth worked for me was that I was given a call in December. It was actually after I started writing Flash. They were working on Rebirth. They knew what it was. But I think there was a bit of like, well, let's see how he's doing before we tell him everything that's going on, right? So I was working on Flash. I just started working. Like, this is really early on. And then I got a call. And they were like, okay, here's what Rebirth is. Wally West is coming back. These are the things that are happening. And I was like, oh my God, well, how can I be involved? Like, how can I write Wally? How can I do these things that we're talking about doing? And because I was so, and also because I was writing Flash, but because I was so enthusiastic about it, I got to read the script really early, and it was really great being able to read it that way, be able to read it kind of fresh and get to that scene of him coming back and explanation and all that stuff. It was really a kind of a cool way to see it. I feel like I was spoiled, basically. I was able to get a glimpse at it before it was even a thing out there, you know? Yeah. It was a good book.
Yeah.
What Ryan left out is that he was tippy-toeing around Leanne while he was like...
Oh my God.
She was asleep.
Well, dude, that happened to me when when my wife always gives me a hard time about this, but on our honeymoon, I was still promoting my Marvel work at the time. And we were in the line to the Eiffel Tower. We were actually in the Eiffel Tower. Like, we were in that long process to get to the top.
Yeah.
And I was still like downloading pictures of covers so I could tweet the covers on the day the books were coming out. Because I was still like, I have to promote these books. Like, I can't let a Wednesday go without me being like, here are my books. So I was still doing. My wife always gives me a hard time about it. She's always like, I can't believe you're still working on it. I'm like, oh, we're in line for hours.
I was out of the store for like 3 Wednesdays, and it's like it just disappears. Like, I don't understand how the world works, but I don't have my Wednesday comics. It's it's so weird.
Rebirth gave us one of our most infamous episodes.
Oh yeah, that too.
Well, the running joke is that with the new book that there's going to be a sequel to this famous Ryan story, that he's going to have to do this midnight random reading again.
for some other book, it'll happen again.
Well, with this one, like we were saying before, we're trying to make sure we get to retailers this week, and so you can get a chance to read it and then
that's great.
See all the cool stuff that's coming and all the crazy stuff that happens in it.
So we have a couple non-Infinite Frontier questions. If you don't mind taking a couple of these real quick.
Sure.
From where was it? There was from Brandon. He says, "Super excited for whatever Josh does next. Easily my favorite writer at the moment. Are there any plans for a Flash omnibus of your collection? Of a collection of your work? Have you any word on that?"
I do not know. I'm going to say that as far as I know, no right now. I mean, thank you for the compliment. That's awesome to hear. I'm like, our last trade isn't even out yet. Like, the last trade collecting my stuff, it probably won't even come out until the fall. It'll be like almost a whole year after it came out before you get the last trade. I don't think there's a plan right now for any omnibus stuff of mine for a while. I mean, if you look at the stuff that Mark did and how long it took for all of Mark's stuff to get collected, and you look at the stuff it took a while for Jeff's stuff to really get collected. And I know they're recollecting his omnibuses right now in a different arrangement. But I think it'll be some time. I think it'll be some time before we start getting like giant collections like that of my stuff. That'd be really cool. No. If they did it, here's the thing though, if he did it, I would want to curate the crap out of it. I want to get your hands on it and talk with the designers on how to do it. There's a certain, like, the order of things and make sure it's all collected the way I want it to be collected. And I'd probably actually go through and rewrite some lines of dialogue. But, I would want to be super involved if that ever happened.
We got 2 questions from Gideon to Eternity on Twitter, and one of them is kind of just had a bunch of questions, kind of all very similar. So I'll read his. The first is, what can we expect for the new character in the Robin series, Flatline?
Flatline is really cool. We originally, the plan for Flatline was she was going to be Lord Deathman's new sidekick.
Oh, okay.
And, she still is. That was a character when I started developing the book for Robin and we started talking about different stuff. I really wanted to do that. I wanted to give Lord Deathman a sidekick. And so I wrote this whole thing for her. And I was calling her, at the time, I was calling her Lord Death Girl in my notes. And I sent this. So with that book, because what Robin is about Robin entering this tournament. He enters this like Mortal Kombat Street Fighter tournament. And I was like, well, I'm going to get all these really cool fighters across the DCU and then have some cool surprises here and there. But then I was like, I want to make a bunch of new ones, and it'd be cool to have this one as one of the new ones. And I had this huge list. So Flatline is part of that list of new characters that I created for the book. And I gave that humongous document of stuff to Gleb and was like, let's have fun with this. And then he gravitated toward her when she was still Lord Death Girl, and then he did this design for her. And in the design, he drew a flatline in the background. And I was like, oh. Not only did I say, oh, her name is not Lord Death Girl, her name is Flatline. Not only did that happen, but it was like just his design of her, his first design of her. I was like, oh, that's perfect, but add this, this, and this. And he did it, and that's what we have, the design now. She's a lot of fun to write. She's a major part of the supporting cast going forward. There's a lot of cool stuff that happens with her. She's just fun to write. I don't know. That book has a really cool supporting cast. Like, I love writing Damien, but it has Ravager in it, and has Flatline, and there's some other members of Damien's family that are going to be in it, and then we have a couple other surprises of characters that are going to be in it. That I'm just having so much fun with that book. It's easily the most fun I've ever had. All the stuff I've done, I love a lot of the work I've done, but Damien, that Robin is just pure fun to work on.
Now,
that book.
I have a quick question on that Robin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have him saying
Yeah, of course.
Have to.
What was that? What'd you say?
Oh, I said you have to.
Yeah, of course. I think when I have him do it, I have him do it at times where I make kind of jokes about it, I guess. Like, he does it when it's appropriate, but there are times where I'll have characters just straight out be like, what are you even saying? Like, like I'll have characters kind of respond to him saying it a little bit.
So I don't know how much. I'm sure DC pays a little bit of attention as a creator. I don't know how much you pay attention to this stuff, but your Robin issue is lighting up, or because the solicitations are out now. The speculation boards. I don't know if that affects you or means anything, but we have a number of customers who well, while many of them read comics, quite a few of them are a little bit more on the speculation side of comics, and all of them have placed multi-issue orders for issue number 1. I'm assuming based on Flatline. Mm-hmm. So
that's good to hear. Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah,
I definitely. I mean, listen, like the fact that I started working at a comic book store when I was like 14 years old. My job has always been to be at the. I'm always going to be that kid on the counter trying to sell comics. Like, I will always be that person in some ways. And so I always talk about that when we're having a lot of conversations about the books and how to sell them, and so it is on my mind of how I can best sell this stuff, but my mind is a little bit more on like, how can I just make cool shit? And if I was at the counter, how would I sell this stuff to somebody? And is it something I would want to buy is always a big part of it. And Robin, it's weird. I think that me in high school would have loved this Robin book. I think I would have liked, and also because Gleb is on it, and like Gleb Malanikov, who's the artist, he has a very cliffhanger-like style. He's obviously influenced by Joe Mad and Humberto Ramos and a lot of
Toby just added the book to his pull list. So.
And a lot of Chris Michelle. What's that?
It was added to begin with.
Okay,
yeah.
Well,
now it's 2 copies.
We talk about that stuff a lot. We were with the lettering. I was sending them screen grabs of Battle Chasers. I was like, oh, look at how they're doing that. Look at how they did the lettering, like Richard Starkings did the lettering in Battle Chasers and with Comic Craft. And I'm like, look at this stuff. Gleb and I are fun. We have like a shorthand, I think, because of our love for Joe Mad in particular. And so we go back and forth with each other on stuff. And yeah, there's a lot of conversations about that stuff.
I was going to say the early images also reminds me of Ale Garza's Ninja Boy.
Yeah, and actually, Ale Garza drew one of my earliest DC jobs. He drew an issue of Superman and Batman. It was Superman and Batman 77, and it was a story about Damian. It was Damian and Supergirl on an adventure on Halloween together. And ever since then, I've tried to write Damian. That was 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. And after I did that book, I was like, I want to write Damian. I want to do a Robin book. And I asked about it all the time until they finally gave it to me.
Very cool.
Yeah, Ollie Greiser was great. I was super bummed because there's pages of that book that I wish I owned, and I found out he sold them at Long Beach Comic Con when it came out. And yeah, there's like a 2-page sequence of Damian fighting against Killer Croc that I wish I owned. The person who owns them, they have them on whatever Comic Art Fans or whatever.
Yeah.
And I always look at them every once in a while because I love those pages. And he talks about how he bought them off of Ollie at Long Beach Comic Con. I'm like, I think I was at that con. I wish I bought them. Yeah.
So we definitely did get a couple questions about Nailbiter,
sure.
your independent book. So, issue 10, I believe is the final issue.
Yeah, it's the final issue for now.
Or is it done at issue 10? I believe this is.
Yeah, issue 10 of Nailbiter Returns is the end for now. Being very candid with you, I can't believe that Mike and I both put out 10 issues of a comic when we both had babies in the same year. My son was born in December. His daughter was born in August. And yeah, I don't know how we did it, but we did. We got 10 issues out. We had always intended for Nailbiter Returns to be 10 issues long. That was always the plan. If it blew up in sales and all this different stuff, it kind of justified it. We probably would have kept going, but the plan was always only to do 10 issues with a plan to do more later on. But we wanted to come back and tell this particular story, and then we'll come back and tell another story later on. But also schedules. It's like I have a lot on my plate. Mike has things on his plate. And it was just cool to come back for these 10 issues and then go our separate ways again, and then we'll come back again. But, I mean, Mike is someone I talk to every day. Like, we chat with each other every day. So we'll come back around to it.
Final question here. It's kind of a little more general questions from Jesse is on our Facebook group. He says, when you started writing for DC, was there kind of a magic for writing characters that you've obviously read and are bigger than all of us combined, right? I mean, what is it like writing Batman, Superman, Justice League? I think this is a dream of a lot of fans and a lot of budding creators.
That's super surreal. I mean, like I wanted to write comics since I was a little kid. This is all I ever wanted to do. Like there was nothing else ever. I want to do this, and I very particularly wanted to write for DC. Like I love Marvel. There's stuff I would love to do at Marvel. There's books and characters that I love, and there's a slew of creator-owned books. But when it came to doing the big universe stuff, my head was always in DC, and I knew the continuity of DC. Like I clearly, even as a kid, was much more obsessed with DC, and even working at the comic book store in high school, and then when I worked at the comic book store in college, I kind of touched everything. Like I would read Image and Marvel and everything else, and a lot of independents. And I still do, but I clearly, if somebody came in my office, I have a Batman tattoo, for God's sakes. It's like, I'm very clearly a DC person. Bendis and I were talking about this a few years ago, where DC was clearly my home in a lot of ways. Aside from creator-owned stuff, with Image and Skybound. But DC is a place that's very important to me. When it comes to writing a lot of this stuff, it's super weird. And there are days James and I will talk about it because James is also a huge DC nerd, and he and I'll have these moments of how did we get here? Because we're navigating an entire universe at this point. There's times we're having conversations about an entire universe that we love, and now we're the ones sort of navigating it and trying to steer the ship in some places, and we're the lead cars, and it's very strange at times. But to be super honest, a lot of times it's hard to take a deep breath and settle in and absorb it and appreciate it, because we got work to do. Got scripts to do. We're talking to artists. We're talking to writers. We're doing PDFs. We're having meetings. We're so deep in it all the time that it's tough to sometimes, I think, take a step back and really appreciate it. I never thought, man, it's crazy. I wanted to write The Flash since I was a kid. I remember reading Mark Waid's stuff and being I really want to write The Flash. And I mean, Scott knew that was why Scott actually, Snyder, he was one of the first people to be oh, you should write The Flash, because he knew it was one of my favorite characters. And it's so weird to now be on the other side of it, and how much I pitched for that book and how much I fought to be able to write the Flash, to now be on the other side of writing over 100 issues. I think I ended up writing all together, annuals and specials. It's like 108 issues, I think. It's like I wrote a lot of Flash comics, and to now be on the other side of that is just so strange. To be done with it now is so. It is so weird. I miss it. Some days I miss it. Some days I'm like, give it back. But you know, it is. It's a super surreal feeling sometimes when you actually do let it set in for a minute and be like, oh man, I get to write this stuff. I get to write Batman. I get to write Superman, these things that I love. And sometimes the books, I think when we do get a chance to take a deep breath and kind of let ourselves live in it for a minute, I think the books are better for it. Because I think we do appreciate it and the stories, but I think it allows us to kind of access the characters in an emotional way differently. You know, I think when we're able to kind of slow down, we let the characters slow down at the same time, and then we can tell, I think, sometimes better stories when we take a step back and go, oh man, we're very lucky to be able to do what we do, to be able to tell these stories of these characters and get to add to the mythology. Like, I think it's crazy that, like, if somebody wants to read The Flash from beginning to end, you have to go through 108 issues of my stuff. Like, you have to be able to go through it. But now it's also weird to know that, like, I passed that baton on, and now there are going to be new trades. Because I have on my shelf, my Flash trades are in continuity order. And so, to know now that there's new trades after me now coming, right, that people are doing, it's just such a strange feeling to look at. But any of it, yeah, it's weird sometimes. It's just a weird thing at times to really think about it. But yeah, I love it, and I'm really thankful.
You're going to influence another person that wants to write Flash down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be super weird. Oh, I would say to them. But what's funny with that is what I would say, and I think that's about a lot of the characters. Is I think you know, my Flash run was obviously very much in love with Mark and Jeff, right? Like, my Flash run was very clearly influenced by Mark and Jeff. I would love to see people bring different interpretations or be influenced by different people. Like, that'd be great if somebody comes in, you know, 5 years from now and is like, we're going to do a Godspeed story. That'd be cool. It'd be super weird to see because no one's ever written Godspeed but me. So it'd be super a strange thing to see. But, or I guess we count the TV show, but in terms of the comics, no one's written it but me. But I would hope that people would bring something super new to it and surprise me, because I've read my version of it. You know, I don't want another version of me. I want you. I want to see what you do with it. That's like the cool thing about Immortal Hulk. You know, that's Al doing his version of it. It's not him doing his version of somebody else's. So that's what I would say to somebody now is like, you know, would be awesome if I was influencing somebody to want to write the Flash and then want to do some of the stuff I did. But I would also tell them, like, take that ball and run with it, make it yours, take ownership of it.
You know, it's not exactly the same, but I talk to people regularly about owning a comic store or running a store, and it's you know, that switch from fan or you know, kind of a pastime to a job is a drastic change, and it doesn't always work out for people. You know, I mean, it can ruin your love of the thing that you loved when it's now your job. It's very different, and you have to be I think aware of it.
I never feel that. I guess yes, I agree with you. I guess I'm lucky in that I still really, really love comics and I love DC.
Yeah,
I've been lucky in that I haven't felt burned by our industry. Knock on wood. Like, I haven't really
right.
kind of like, you know, even when I've talked about this. This isn't like a secret. So, you know, I was at DC before Flash. I had done a few years. I was there doing like little stuff here and there. I was doing like filler issues and short stories, and I worked on Voodoo that had come out of New 52, like after Ron Mars, and I've been working on DC stuff. Like, I did an Uncharted comic that was based on the video game through Wildstorm with DC.
I remember.
And I was doing stuff so I was doing stuff at DC for a while. Like, there was a few years there where I was doing like enough little work. And I remember after Voodoo ended, I was doing all these like weird little filler things, and it just wasn't working out. And I basically was like shown the door, right? And it was like, this isn't working. They stopped answering your email. They stopped answering your calls. And I remember being like, And this is part of why I think I appreciate it so much more now. But at the time, I was like, oh man, my dream was to write DC Comics, and I just blew it. Like, it's not going to happen. And it's over. This is like end of 2012. And I was like, God, that sucks. Like, I loved this thing, and I had my shot, and I blew it. It didn't work out. And I went and did Image books. And, I've always been, even before DC stuff, I was always doing a lot of self-publishing, and I love doing creator-owned books. So I was totally happy doing creator-owned stuff. It wasn't until Scott Snyder was saying, you should come back. And then I knew enough people working at DC that were like, you should definitely come back and do more. And that's why it's like there's that gap. It's not like I came back to DC and was doing more one-shots and minis. I came back with the Flash, like one of the flagship characters. Because I was kind of adamant about that too. I didn't want something small or whatever. If I'm coming back for something I love. But yeah, it definitely made me kind of appreciate the situation I was in. And then but even with that time period in between, I didn't, even though I felt like, oh, I'm on the outs with DC and I'm not doing the stuff that I love, and working with these characters I love, I never felt any kind of like anger at the company. I never felt any kind of like burned out or not wanting to read their books. I kept reading Batman, I kept reading Flash and Green Lantern, and I was still reading stuff as it was coming out, that I wanted to read, like the different characters I was interested in. Yeah, I never felt that much of it, but I know you have to be able to find a way to, how do I put this, make sacrifices for the fan part of yourself at times. Because the fan part of you sometimes just wants these characters to have happy endings. Like, you just want everyone to be happy. And that's not, you have to challenge them. In some days as a writer, you're the character's real arch nemesis. Like, it's my job to try to figure out a way to kill this character.
I see this regularly with fans on the internet who I feel like get angry when bad stuff happens, and I'm like, well, if nothing happened, then there's no story.
Conflict drives story. Do you?
Yeah, exactly.
In this concept?
I think there is room for maybe some kind of book that is low or light on conflict. I think those things exist, but getting kind of a retailer perspective, the other thing I've noticed is that every time people do those kinds of books, the books that are really low stakes, they don't sell. So you have to have that conflict to make you want to come back. You want to know your characters are okay, but
I think especially with the superhero genre and kind of tropes, that is.
Yeah, you said yes. Yeah, conflict drives story.
Are, right?
You have to be able to do that kind of stuff, and that is my job: is take a character I love and try to figure out how to kill him. Like, that's it, and try to throw those things out there to get them in sort of in trouble constantly. That's a big part of the job. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for talking about Infinite Frontier stuff. I mean, I think there's a lot of it's a really interesting issue. It's different from Rebirth, but I think it definitely has that kind of Rebirth energy in it of just taking the cool stuff we're doing in the DCU and trying to move forward with it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. But, as a retailer, I occasionally get to read stuff ahead of time, which is really fun. I very much am excited to. I won't spoil stuff. I'm sure spoilers will be out there pretty quickly. I'm sure it'll be a big
PR push for this issue. So, yeah, as long as it sells and people enjoy it when they get out there and be able to read it, I'm hoping. It doesn't get too badly spoiled.
No, it should be all right. Well, Josh, it was fantastic having you on. Really looking forward to Infinite Frontier. And I should say, for everyone, orders for Infinite Frontier are due at your local comic shop this Sunday. That is when we place our orders. It's called FOC, or Final Order Cutoff. It's all a little behind the scenes stuff here for retailers. A lot of stores actively push their final order cutoff books to customers, but I definitely want to make sure that stores are getting their orders in. Everything goes through Lunar distribution now, so for all the DC comics, and their cutoff is Sundays. So if you are wanting to get Infinite Frontier, hopefully your store has many, many, many copies available. But if you want to reserve your copy, it comes out March 2nd. This Sunday is your final day to reserve that before stores place their orders. So get those orders in. It's always very, very important to pre-order your comics. Even a big book like this, pre-ordering is always super important. All right, Josh, it's been fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. We'll see you on the other side of Infinite Frontier.